Grace? Grace, look at me. What's wrong? Grace, please look at me. What's happening to you? Grace, please look at me.
The moment Grace's fingers brushed Daniel's, something inside her burned. She didn't scream. She simply stopped. Her white gown shimmered under the church lights as her body swayed. Once, twice, then her eyes, the same eyes that had smiled at him moments ago, went completely blank. She looked at Daniel like he was a stranger. "Grace?" His voice cracked. She flinched from his touch like it was poison. Gasps tore through the crowd. A phone clattered to the floor. A child wailed. But Diana, standing behind her best friend as maid of honor, didn't gasp. She knew. She knew exactly what had just taken Grace, and she knew exactly who had sent it.
Hello guys, this is Afrival Stories. Kindly share your thoughts in the comments between Dania, Grace and Diana. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe.
7 years earlier, Grace and Diana were just two 8-year-old girls chasing each other barefoot through a schoolyard in Accra, their laughter louder than the bell that called them back to class. They had met on Grace's first day at Sunrise Primary, when Grace, small, new, and terrified, dropped her lunch tray in front of the entire 3rd grade. The other children laughed. Diana didn't. She simply walked over, picked up the spilled rice with her bare hands, and said, "Now we match. I dropped mine yesterday." It wasn't true, but it made Grace laugh through her tears, and from that day, they were inseparable. They grew up trading secrets under mango trees, sharing one umbrella in the rain, promising, the way only children can promise, with total conviction and no understanding of what the future might ask of them, that nothing would ever come between them. "Not boys," 12-year-old Diana had said once, wrinkling her nose. "Not distance, not even death." "Not even death," Grace agreed, and they'd sealed it the way they sealed everything. Pinky fingers locked, foreheads pressed together, giggling at their own seriousness. Neither of them could have known how much that promise would cost. By the time they were 24, the girls who once shared lunch trays had become women who shared apartments, ambitions, and a bond that everyone around them admired and quietly envied. Grace worked as a nurse, gentle and overworked, the kind of woman who remembered the names of every patient's grandchildren. Diana ran a small tailoring business from a shop 2 streets from Grace's flat, her fingers quick with needle and thread, her laugh quicker still. But laughter, as anyone who has carried a secret knows, can be its own kind of mask. Diana had a wound she never spoke of. Not to her mother, not to her mirror, and certainly not to Grace. It had opened 3 years earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, when Grace had introduced her to a tall, soft-spoken man named Daniel, a structural engineer with a crooked smile and a habit of showing up 15 minutes late to everything. "He's just a friend from church," Grace had said, laughing, the day she brought him around. "Don't get any ideas." Diana had smiled and said nothing, because by the time Grace said those words, it was already too late. Diana's ideas had arrived long before the introduction. Quietly, the way most dangerous things do, the very first time Daniel had looked at her before he'd ever looked at Grace at all. That was the secret Diana buried, not out of malice, out of fear. Fear that saying it aloud would cost her the only 2 people who mattered to her in one breath. She told herself it would fade. It did not fade. And 3 years later, standing in that same church, watching her best friend's mind unravel before an altar Diana herself had helped decorate with white lilies, she understood, with the terrible clarity of someone finally facing what they'd spent years running from, that some feelings, buried long enough, do not disappear. They ferment, they wait, and eventually they demand a price no one is prepared to pay. The friendship survived that Tuesday evening. What Diana didn't know was that survival and safety are not the same thing. Over the following months, Daniel became a fixture in their lives. Sunday lunches after church, movie nights crammed onto Grace's small couch, the three of them laughing over jollof rice that Diana always seasoned a little too heavily because she liked watching Daniel reach for water and complain. It was easy, almost, to pretend it was simple friendship. Diana became skilled at pretending. She had to be. She watched the way Daniel's eyes softened whenever Grace walked into a room, the way his laugh changed. Quieter, warmer, when it was aimed only at her. She watched and she smiled, and she told herself that loving someone sometimes meant loving them enough to want their happiness even when it wasn't with you. It was a beautiful lie. Diana repeated it to herself so often that some nights she almost believed it. Almost. "You've been quiet lately," Grace said one evening, curled on Diana's couch with a mug of tea between her palms. "Ever since Daniel started coming around more. Everything okay?" Diana's needle paused mid-stitch. For a moment, just a moment, the truth rose in her throat like something alive, clawing to get out. "I love him, Grace. I loved him before you did. I've loved him since before he knew your name." "I'm fine," she said instead, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Business has been busy." Grace studied her a second longer than necessary, the way best friends do when something feels unspoken, but they can't name what. Then she let it go, because that's what trust does. It fills in the silences with the kindest explanation available. Diana hated herself a little more each time Grace chose to trust her. The wound deepened on a rainy Thursday in October, when Daniel showed up at Diana's shop alone, holding a small velvet box he wasn't ready to open yet. "I need a woman's opinion," he said, sheepish, rain dripping from his jacket onto her clean floor. "You know her better than anyone." Diana's hands went still over the sewing machine. "Know who better than anyone?" "Grace." He laughed, nervous, unaware, completely, devastatingly unaware of what he was asking of her. "I want to propose. I don't know if it's the right time. If she's ready, if I'm ready. You'd tell me if I was making a mistake, wouldn't you? You're like her sister. You'd know." There are moments that test a person more thoroughly than any exam, any illness, any grief. Moments where the truth and the lie sit side by side, and only one of them will let you keep breathing normally in front of the person you love. Diana looked at the box in his hands. She looked at his face, so full of hope it made her physically ache, and she said, "She'd say yes before you finished the sentence." Daniel's whole face lit up with relief and joy, and he thanked her and hugged her. A brief, friendly hug that nearly broke something loose in Diana's chest and left her shop humming, the velvet box tucked safely in his coat pocket. Diana sat alone in the silence after the bell above her door stopped ringing, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to cry. She cried for the girl who once promised, pinky fingers locked, that nothing would come between her and Grace. She cried because she had just handed the final piece of her own heart's ending to the man who would break it, wrapped in encouragement, sealed with a smile. She told herself this was the last time she would cry over it. She told herself she was strong enough to watch her best friend marry the only man she had ever wanted, and still show up smiling, still throw rice, still dance at the reception. She did not yet know how wrong she was. 2 weeks later, Daniel proposed at sunset on the beach in Labate, with Grace's closest cousins hiding behind a fishing boat filming everything on their phones. Grace said yes before he even finished lowering himself to one knee, just as Diana had predicted. And the whole beach erupted into cheering, into music, into the particular joy that only exists at the beginning of something. Diana stood at the edge of the crowd, clapping until her palms stung, smiling until her face ached, and screaming with the other women when Grace lifted her hand to show off the ring. No one noticed that Diana's eyes glistened for reasons that had nothing to do with happiness. No one, except one person. An older woman Diana had never met, small, sharp-eyed, dressed simply in faded blue wax print, stood a little apart from the celebration, watching not the bride, but the maid of honor. Watching the way Diana's smile trembled at the edges, watching the way her hands shook slightly as she clapped. As the crowd began drifting toward the cars, the woman approached Diana quietly, touching her elbow with fingers surprisingly strong for someone so small. "You smile like a woman burying something," the woman said, her voice low, almost gentle. "I know that smile. I have worn it myself." Diana turned, startled. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" The woman's eyes held hers, unblinking, patient as old water. "Not yet," she said, "but you will." And then, before Diana could ask what that meant, the old woman turned and disappeared into the crowd of celebrating families, leaving Diana standing alone at the edge of the sand, the ring still glinting on her best friend's finger somewhere behind her, and a cold, creeping certainty settling into her chest that something had just been set into motion, something she had not yet agreed to, but somehow already knew she would. The old woman found Diana again 3 weeks later, and this time Diana did not ask how she knew where to look. She was sitting alone outside her shop after closing, boxes of unopened fabric stacked beside her, the wedding invitations Grace had proudly dropped off that morning still sitting unopened on the counter inside. Diana hadn't been able to bring herself to read one yet. "You haven't opened it," the woman said, settling onto the bench beside her without invitation. "The invitation." Diana startled, then didn't. Some part of her had been waiting. "How do you keep finding me?" "I'm not finding you," the woman said simply. "You are the one standing where the pain is loudest. That is easy to find for someone who knows how to listen." Up close, the woman looked older than she had on the beach. Deep lines around eyes that seemed to hold something ancient and unhurried, a calm that felt less like peace and more like patience that had survived many storms. She introduced herself only as Mama Ajoa, and she spoke the way people speak when they have already decided how a conversation will end. "Tell me her name," Mama Ajoa said. "The bride." "Grace." Diana's voice cracked on the single syllable. "My best friend since we were 8 years old." "And the groom?" Diana's hands curled into fists in her lap. "Daniel." Mama Ajoa nodded slowly, as though confirming something she already suspected. "You loved him first." It wasn't a question, and Diana didn't bother denying it. 3 years of silence had exhausted whatever strength lying required. "Before Grace even knew his name," she whispered. "And I never said a word, not one word, in 3 years. I did everything right. I was the perfect friend, and in 9 days, I have to stand beside her and watch her become his wife." "Doing everything right," Mama Ajoa said quietly, "and being at peace are not the same thing." Diana let out a broken laugh. "What am I supposed to do? Ruin her happiness? Tell her the truth now, 3 years too late, and destroy us both?" "I am not asking you to tell her anything." The old woman's voice dropped lower, softer, almost kind. The kind of kindness that makes a person lean in before they understand what they're leaning toward. There are older ways of handling pain like yours, ways that do not require confession, ways that do not require anyone's happiness to end in front of a crowd. Something in Diana went very still. "What are you talking about?" Mama Ajoa reached into the folds of her wrapper and produced a small pouch, worn smooth with age, tied with a thread the color of dried blood. "A wedding needs a bride who is ready to say her vows," she said. "It does not need to happen at all if the bride simply isn't able to say them." Diana stared at the pouch as though it might catch fire. "You're talking about a curse." "I am talking about mercy," Mama Ajoa corrected, gently. "For you, and in its own way, for her. She will not be harmed. She will not die. She will simply not become his wife, not on that day, not on any day after. The wedding will end before it begins. No one is blamed. No one is exposed. You will still have your best friend. You will simply also have the chance you were never given." Every instinct in Diana screamed to refuse. She thought of pinky fingers locked under a mango tree. She thought of Grace picking rice off the schoolyard floor with her bare hands 20 years ago, saying, "Now we match," healing a wound with laughter before Diana even understood she'd needed healing. "I won't hurt her," Diana said, and her voice shook with the effort of believing it. "You will not," Mama Ajoa agreed. "I promise you that. She simply won't become his wife." The word simply would return to haunt Diana many times in the weeks that followed. But that night, sitting outside her shop with the invitation still sealed inside, Exhausted from 3 years of carrying a silence that had grown too heavy for one heart, Diana reached out and took the pouch from the old woman's hand. It was lighter than she expected. Almost nothing. Almost harmless. "What do I do with it?" she asked, and the question left her mouth before she could stop it. The true moment of surrender. The instant the bargain became real. Mama Ajoa's eyes, patient and ancient, did not blink. "Sew a single thread from this pouch into the hem of her wedding gown," she said, "where your fingers have touched 1,000 times before in friendship. No one will notice one more thread among so many. By the time she wears it, the binding will already be done." Diana's tailoring hands, hands that had spent a lifetime stitching love into fabric for the people she cared about, closed slowly around the pouch. "And afterward," she whispered, "will I forget I ever loved him?" For the first time, something almost like sorrow crossed the old woman's face. "No," Mama Ajoa said quietly. "That part, my dear, was never part of the bargain. Some wounds the old ways cannot heal. They can only rearrange who suffers, and when." She rose from the bench, smoothed her wrapper, and walked back into the dark, leaving Diana alone with a pouch in her palm and 9 days left until the wedding. 9 days to decide whether love, buried long enough, was worth what it was about to cost the only 2 people she had left to love at all. Diana did not sleep the night before the wedding. She sat at her sewing table with the hem of Grace's gown spread across her lap, the single thread from Mama Ajoa's pouch coiled in her palm like something alive. Outside, Accra was quiet in the way cities are quiet only in the hour before a life changes forever. Somewhere across town, Grace was sleeping soundly, dreaming, Diana imagined, of a future that was about to be stolen from her by the one person she trusted most. She won't be harmed, Diana told herself, threading the needle with hands that would not stop trembling. She simply won't become his wife. She stitched the thread into the hem where 1,000 ordinary stitches already lived, hidden among lace and pearl beading, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look. It took 4 minutes. It felt like 4 years. When it was done, Diana sat very still, waiting to feel something. Relief, certainty, peace. She felt none of it. She felt only the cold, hollow quiet of a woman who has just done something she cannot undo. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and merciless. Grace glowed in a way brides are supposed to glow, laughing as her mother fussed over her veil, teasing Diana about being more nervous than the bride herself. "You'd think you were the one getting married," Grace said, squeezing Diana's hand. "Thank you for everything, for always being here. I don't know what I'd do without you." Diana smiled and said nothing, because there was nothing left in her that could survive saying something. By the time Grace walked down the aisle, sunlight pouring gold through the church windows, Diana had almost convinced herself that nothing would happen at all. That Mama Ajoa's promise was theater, superstition, an old woman's trick to comfort a heartbroken girl. Almost. Right up until Grace reached the altar. Right up until Daniel took her hand, smiling the smile Diana had once been foolish enough to hope belonged to her. And then Grace's face emptied, exactly as it had at the very beginning of this story, exactly as you already watched happen in that opening moment, though now you understand what Diana understood in that instant, standing frozen behind the bride she loved as a sister. She had done this. The wedding dissolved into chaos. Daniel begged Grace to look at him, to say his name,
Grace,
to come back from
look at
wherever
me.
her mind had gone.
What's
But Grace
wrong?
only stared through him as though he were a stranger
Grace?
standing too close. Guests
Grace,
wept.
look at
Grace's
me.
mother screamed for a doctor.
What's wrong?
And Diana stood motionless at the center of the storm she herself had planted, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to undo 4 minutes of stitching that had just unraveled an entire life. The wedding was canceled before the sun set that same day. What followed was not the quiet, tidy ending Mama Ajoa had promised. Grace did not simply not become his wife. She stopped recognizing her own mother. She wandered from her family's house twice in the first week, found barefoot on the roadside, murmuring words no one could understand, flinching from anyone who touched her. Doctors ran tests and found nothing. No fever, no injury, no explanation. Modern medicine could offer for a healthy 27-year-old woman's mind simply disappearing overnight. Diana visited every day for the first month, sitting beside Grace's bed, holding a hand that no longer recognized her touch, whispering apologies that dissolved unheard into the space between them. She told herself she would find a way to fix it. She told herself Mama Ajoa would help her reverse it, if only she asked. But when Diana returned to the bench outside her shop, the old woman was gone. No note, no trace, no thread of the wrapper she'd worn, as if she had never existed at all. As if the bargain, once made, required no further conversation. Daniel changed too, in his own quieter way. He visited Grace daily, sat by her bed for hours, held her hand even when she screamed at him to leave. He grew thinner. He stopped smiling, the smile Diana remembered. And slowly, inevitably, he began asking questions no one wanted to answer. "The doctors say there's nothing wrong with her physically," he said to Diana one evening, 6 weeks after the wedding, his eyes red-rimmed from too many sleepless nights. "So what happened, Diana? You were her best friend. You knew her better than anyone. Did she ever seem afraid of something? Someone? Did anything happen before? The wedding that I don't know about?" Diana's mouth went dry. Every version of the truth rose in her throat at once, fighting to be the one that finally escaped. "I don't know," she heard herself say instead, the lie tasting like ash. Daniel studied her for a long moment. A moment that stretched too long, held too much weight, the way silences do when someone is beginning, however faintly, to suspect the person across from them. "You've been strange since the wedding," he said quietly. "Strange since before the wedding, actually. I noticed. I just didn't want to believe it meant anything." Diana's heart slammed against her ribs. "What are you saying?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked instead toward the hospital room where Grace sat rocking gently by the window, humming a tune from their childhood that only Diana would have recognized. A song they used to sing under the mango tree 20 years ago, before any of them knew love could be sharpened into something that cuts. "I don't know yet," Daniel said finally, rising to leave, "but I intend to find out." And as he walked away down the hospital corridor, Diana remained frozen in her chair, watching her best friend hum a song from a childhood promise neither of them had kept, understanding with sick dawning horror that the reckoning Mama Ajoa never mentioned had already begun, and that it was coming, inevitably, for her. The price came for Diana on a night she least expected it, 3 months after the wedding that never was. She had taken to sleeping poorly, waking at odd hours to the sound of her own heartbeat, as though her body understood something her mind kept refusing to admit. That night, she woke to find Mama Ajoa sitting calmly at the foot of her bed, as if she had never disappeared at all, as if 3 months of silence had simply been a held breath before this exact moment. "You said she wouldn't be harmed," Diana whispered, her voice raw with 3 months of guilt she'd had nowhere to put. "You said it would be simple." "I said she would not die," Mama Ajoa corrected gently. "I never said the world would be kind about the rest. Bindings do not create pain from nothing, child. They only redirect what was already there, waiting to be spent. Your friend's love for the world she knew had to go somewhere. So did your love for the man who never chose you." "Then take it back," Diana begged, sitting up, gripping the edge of her blanket, like it could anchor her to a version of herself that hadn't done this. "Undo it. I'll pay whatever it costs. Just give her back her mind." Mama Ajoa studied her for a long moment, and for the first time, something like approval flickered behind those ancient eyes. "That," she said quietly, "is the first true thing you have said to me since the beach." "What do I have to do?" "The binding was sewn in secret," the old woman said. "It can only be unsewn in the open. You will have to speak the truth in front of every person who believed you were only ever Grace's friend, not whispered, not confessed quietly in a hospital room where no one else can hear, spoken where it can be witnessed, by Grace's family, by Daniel, by the community that gathered to watch her become his wife. Only a truth given as freely and publicly as the lie was hidden can call the thread back out." "And if I do that," Diana said, "she'll be restored?" "If you do that," Mama Ajoa said, rising to leave, You will lose everything you were trying to protect when you first took that pouch from my hand. Her trust, Daniel's respect, the good opinion of everyone who has ever called you kind. That is the price, not a curse, a confession, the oldest and hardest currency there is. She was gone before Diana could ask anything else, leaving her alone with the truth she had spent 3 years and 3 months running from, and one final chance to stop running. Diana called Grace's family 2 days later and asked them to gather. Grace's mother, her aunts, Daniel, the pastor who was meant to have married them. She did not tell them why. She simply said it was time they knew the truth about what happened on the wedding day. And something in her voice, hollowed out by months of guilt, made every one of them come. She stood in Grace's mother's living room, Grace herself seated by the window as she had been for months, humming softly, present in body and absent everywhere else. And Diana told them everything. The love she'd buried for 3 years, the velvet box in Daniel's hands that she'd blessed with a lie, the old woman on the beach, the pouch, the single thread stitched into a hem where 1,000 ordinary stitches already lived. The room did not erupt the way she expected. It went silent instead, a silence heavier than any scream, filled with the particular grief of people realizing that betrayal had worn the face of someone they loved. Daniel did not shout. He simply looked at Diana for a long time, then turned to Grace, still humming by the window, and something in his expression broke and rebuilt itself into something Diana couldn't name. "You said the truth would fix her," Grace's mother said finally, her voice trembling with fury and hope in equal measure. "So fix her." Diana knelt beside Grace's chair, took her unresponsive hand the way she had 100 times over 3 months, and spoke, not to the room now, but only to her, the way she used to speak to the 8-year-old girl who'd picked rice off a schoolyard floor with her bare hands to save a stranger from embarrassment. "I'm sorry," Diana whispered. "I should have told you the truth the first day you brought him to me. I chose silence because I was afraid of losing you both. Instead, I lost you both anyway, and nearly lost you forever. You were never the problem, Grace. My jealousy was. Please, come back. Please forgive me, even if you never speak to me again after today." For a long moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Then Grace blinked, slowly, like someone surfacing from very deep water. And her eyes, for the first time in 3 months, found Diana's face and actually saw her. "Diana?" Grace's voice cracked, thin and confused, but hers, unmistakably, achingly hers. "Why is everyone crying?" If this story moved you the way it moved me writing it, don't scroll away without hitting subscribe, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and telling me in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking from Grace and Diana's story tonight, because what happened after this moment is a conversation for another day. Grace's recovery was slow, and the friendship that followed was never the same one they'd built under the mango tree. It was quieter, more careful, rebuilt stitch by stitch the way Diana once built gowns. Except this time, every thread was chosen in the light, not hidden in the dark. Daniel eventually married someone else, 2 years later, in a wedding Diana was not invited to, and she accepted that loss the way she accepted all the others, as payment already agreed to, already spent. Diana never used another pouch, never sought another shortcut around a hard truth, and she told the story of that year to anyone who would listen, always ending it the same way, that jealousy rarely destroys only the person it's aimed at. It first destroys the one who carries it, long before it ever reaches its target. Grace and Diana have been best friends since childhood, bonded by a promise that nothing would ever come between them. When Grace falls in love with Daniel, the same man Diana has secretly loved for years, Diana stays silent, choosing loyalty over honesty. As the wedding approaches, her buried pain grows unbearable, and a mysterious old woman offers her a way out, a ritual that will stop the wedding without hurting anyone. Desperate, Diana agrees. On the wedding day, Grace's mind breaks the moment she takes Daniel's hand, and she never fully recovers. Months pass as Grace wanders lost inside her own mind. Daniel searches for answers, and Diana is consumed by guilt over what she's done. When the same power she once turned to returns to collect its price, Diana learns the only way to undo the damage is to confess the truth publicly, losing everyone's trust and respect in the process. She does it anyway. Standing before Grace's family, she admits everything: her love, her silence, her choice. It's only then, kneeling beside Grace and speaking from the heart, that Grace slowly comes back to herself. The story closes on a quieter, more honest friendship rebuilt from the wreckage, and a lasting lesson. Jealousy doesn't just destroy the person it's aimed at. It destroys the one who carries it first.